Welcome to the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals training module. At the end of this module, you will be able to identify the risks of being exposed to hazardous chemicals at the workplace, describe the goal of GHS, identify the chemical label elements, and describe safety data sheets, also called SDSs. People commonly work near or with hazardous chemicals. There are about 650,000 hazardous chemical products, and hundreds of new hazardous chemical products are introduced every year. Exposure to, or the release of, these chemicals can cause damage to the heart, central nervous system, kidneys, or lungs, cancer, burns and rashes, dangerous fires and explosions, and other serious hazards. In the past, there were many different ways to determine the hazards of a chemical and many different ways to communicate those hazards. This led to confusion and an increased risk from working with hazardous chemicals. To help reduce this confusion, the United Nations created a global system for standardizing and harmonizing the classification and labeling of chemicals. This standard is known as the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS. The goal of the GHS is to define the health, physical, and environmental hazards of chemicals, create a classification process that uses available data on chemicals for comparison with the defined hazard criteria, and standardize how hazard information and protective measures are communicated on labels and in safety data sheets, or SDSs. The GHS is designed so that countries can decide for themselves if and how they will align their hazard communication regulations with the standard. A country can choose to adopt all of the GHS, adopt only parts of the GHS, or not adopt it at all. It can also choose to make alignment to the GHS mandatory or voluntary. This training module will cover all of the GHS. Check with your local EHS professional for more information on what parts may apply in your country. Under GHS, chemical manufacturers, importers, and distributors are expected to evaluate their chemicals to determine if they present hazards and the type of hazards they present, label their chemical containers with hazard and safety information based on the type of hazards they present, and provide safety data sheets to explain the hazards and protective measures necessary to work with the chemicals. Under GHS, manufacturers, importers, or distributors of hazardous chemicals should label all original containers of hazardous chemicals. These labels contain the following elements: a product identifier that gives the product name exactly as it appears on the safety data sheet, the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer or importer, pictograms that represent the types of hazards the chemical presents, a signal word that indicates how severe the hazard is, hazard statements that further describe the hazards, and precautionary statements that list measures to follow to use or store the chemical more safely. There are 9 GHS pictograms that represent different types of hazards. The pictograms and the hazards they represent are chemicals that present serious health hazards, such as those that cause cancer, flammable materials, chemicals that present less severe health hazards, such as those that irritate the skin, eyes, or respiratory tract, gases under pressure, corrosive materials, explosive materials, oxidizers, chemicals that present hazards to the environment, and chemicals that can cause rapid death or are extremely toxic. The signal word is meant to alert the reader that there is a potential hazard and let them know the relative severity of the hazard. There are two signal words: danger and warning. Danger is used for more severe hazards, while warning is used for less severe hazards. Note that only one signal word is ever used on a label at a time. So if a chemical has a hazard that requires danger to be on the label, warning will not also be on the label, even if the product also has a less severe hazard. Hazard statements give more information on the nature of the chemical's hazards. Precautionary statements are recommendations to minimize or prevent the potential harmful effects of a chemical, covering prevention, response, storage, and disposal. Some countries may also add precautionary pictograms to help communicate these recommendations. Check with your local EHS professional for more information. Under GHS, chemical manufacturers, importers, or distributors should provide safety data sheets, or SDSs, for their hazardous chemicals, following the outlined 16-section format. All SDSs will have the same information in the same order. All safety data sheets, or SDSs, will include information in the following 16 sections. Section 1. Identification. Identifies the chemical, provides contact information for the supplier, and provides recommended uses and any use restrictions. Section 2. Hazard identification. Identifies the hazards the chemical presents, including the chemical's hazard classification, a signal word, a hazard statement, a pictogram, a precautionary statement, and more. Section 3. Composition information on ingredients. Lists the chemical's ingredients and the concentration of the ingredients. Section 4. First aid measures. Includes important first aid information in case someone is exposed to the chemical. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Gives recommendations for fighting a fire caused by the chemical. Section 6. Accidental release measures. Gives recommendations for what to do if the chemical is spilled, leaked, or released. Section 7. Handling and storage. Lists precautions for safe handling and storage. Section 8. Exposure controls, personal protection. Lists exposure limits, engineering controls, and protective measures to minimize the risks of exposure. Section 9. Physical and chemical properties. Lists the chemical's properties when they are relevant. Section 10. Stability and reactivity. Gives information about the chemical's stability and reactivity. Section 11. Toxicological information. Includes toxicological and health effects information, including possible routes of exposure, and short-term and long-term exposure effects. Section 12. Ecological information. Gives information on potential harmful effects to the environment, such as plants, animals, or the ozone layer. Section 13. Disposal considerations. Gives recommendations for the safe handling and disposal of waste. Section 14. Transport information. Gives recommendations for the safe transport of the chemical. Section 15. Regulatory information. Lists safety, health, and environmental regulations that apply. And finally, Section 16. Other information. Lists the date on which the SDS was prepared, when the last revision was made, and other information. GHS was created to help reduce the risk of working with hazardous chemicals. You can help ensure your own safety at work by actively participating in the GHS training, learning to read chemical labels and SDSs, and remembering to consult them, and following all recommended safe work practices.